I am joined by Robert Griffin III, James White, Field Yates Minakaims.
All right, so first play we're going to look at, 2nd and 2, one of the Patriots' first offensive plays.
What's going on, everybody? Mike Kadlick here. Taylor Kyle's there, back with our normal Monday edition of the Patriots Daily Podcast. Now that it is into the offseason, it feels like it is truly a Patriots Daily show, touching on everything going on around the Patriots, Taylor. So thanks for joining me. Thanks for being here. Thanks for getting our show together today because we are jam-packed with a ton of stuff. We're going to start with some coaching staff updates, and then what we're going to do for the rest of the show is basically run through what Mike Vrabel talked about in his introductory press conference a week ago today, hitting on the rules of the team, the culture he wants to build, his annual goals, what he expects out of his players, what he expects out of his coaches, and also we'll touch on Drake Maye and the passing game to sort of wrap it up. So going to be a good show here. Excited to kind of riff and go back and forth about all of that stuff. But first, we have to start with the most breaking news of the Patriots offseason, and that is that special teams coordinator Jeremy Springer is going to return to the team in 2025, notably in the same role as well. Not that he would have taken a demotion necessarily, but we know the connection that Mike Vrabel has with Tom Quinn, which we'll get to here. Feel like there's a pretty good chance that he remains on staff. Springer was great this year. They really flipped and revamped that special teams unit. Brendan Schooler goes from a serial penalty creator last year to an all-pro first team NFLPA, AP, and today comes out as the PFWA's first team all-pro special teamer. So done a great work with him, and he is going to return in 2025. So Taylor, your thoughts on retaining Springer? Do you think it was the right decision? Do you think they should have went elsewhere, or ultimately did they make the right move? And just your thoughts on him returning in 2025.
Definitely, I think the right move, because he took a unit that was one of the worst in the NFL when he got there and turned them into a group that was much closer to the top of the middle of the pack. And not only that, but what he got out of rookies, where Marcellus Dial was immediately the guy who essentially replaced Matthew Slater as the gunner opposite Brendan Schooler. You also had Del Pettis, who Jeremy Springer actually called out because I think it was Los who tweeted about him. And then Jeremy Springer pointed out, like, he was the quarterback of the punt team from day one as a rookie, an undrafted free agent rookie. Extremely impressive there. So what he was able to get out of those rookies, the fact that Marcus Jones, it's easy to kind of forget because he got hurt and wasn't there towards the end of the season, but he had an excellent season as a returner, might have been voted to the Pro Bowl himself, I think, if he'd actually been able to finish the season and stayed at the front of people's minds. But obviously, when you go down and you're a returner, it's the kind of role where there's usually like a handful of deserving candidates, and sometimes it comes down to who can just be on the field the most on top of making the biggest impact. So, yeah, I love the idea of Jeremy Springer coming back. He was always great when we spoke to him. We always talked about how Alex Van Pelt was probably the best coordinator coach that we got to speak to on a regular basis, but Jeremy Springer was right up there. The amount of insight he's able to bring in perspective, the relationship with Brendan Schooler, I think, is significant. He's known Schooler since he first got to college. So they have a connection. Like, I think Schooler also knows Schooler. Oh my God. Brett Springer knows Schooler's brother. There we go.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah. So obviously not a reason you keep somebody, but that's a pretty cool connection there because Brendan Schooler is going to be there for the long haul. And Joe Cardona, even the fact that he had a handful of tackles for the first time in his career, and we found out it was because that in other seasons he wasn't allowed to go downfield and make tackles, which is pretty funny. So maybe we get a Pro Bowl season out of Joe Cardona next year. Who knows? But yeah, I think one of the best moves and one of those obvious moves it felt like in terms of potential retentions was keep Jeremy Springer, him plus Tom Quinn. Looking forward to what happens next season, how they can continue to grow.
Yeah, 3 first-time coordinators in AVP, Covington and Jeremy Springer. I would say Springer definitely made the most of his chance, I guess. AVP also up there. We know what he did with Drake Maye. We'll get into him and his potential involvement in the offense as we move forward in the show. But yeah, good on Springer. I think, like you said, the one that made the most sense. It doesn't necessarily make a ton of sense to bring AVP back or for him to come back in a reduced role. Same goes for DeMarcus Covington, but this one, good unit, one that really flipped since last season. So good stuff for Springer there. Continuing on and being their special teams coordinator heading into next season. Let's continue on here with the rest of the coaching staff updates before we get into the rules of Vrabel. I guess non-Patriots, quickly, we can touch on some news around the NFL, and that is that Ben Johnson was just hired as the Chicago Bears' next head coach. Felt like there was a lot of momentum coming in from the Las Vegas Raiders of late. Thought that Brady sort of was going to make a push there. I know that Diana Rossini just tweeted a couple minutes ago that him and Vrabel and Brady spent 6 hours on a Zoom together the other day to kind of trying to see if they can make that work. But he goes to Chicago, starts to work with Caleb Williams. And now he is going to be there. And then Lou Anarumo, someone who potentially was on the radar as somebody the Patriots could bring in as their defensive coordinator after being fired by Cincinnati last week. He has just been hired as the Indianapolis Colts defensive coordinator. So 2 quick moves. Things are starting to really ramp up here. We get Springer, we get Johnson, and then we get Anarumo just over the last hour.
Yeah, Ben Johnson, it always seemed like it was the Patriots and the Bears as the top teams in this head coaching candidate search. I know that there was a lot of talk of, if you dilly-dally, you might lose Mike Vrabel to the Jets or the Raiders. And I'm just like, I'm sorry, but those are teams where, in terms of resources, they're not exactly overflowing the way the Patriots are. They also don't have their quarterback situations figured out. Ownership, even with Vegas having Tom Brady, he has to be the figurehead because Mark Davis is not someone I think people are jumping through hoops to work for. Right. Same with Woody Johnson and all of that. But with the Bears, they don't have as good of an ownership situation because obviously they stuck with Eberflus. They don't really love to spend a lot of money. And that's why I thought the Patriots probably the top candidate on the market. But the Bears have their quarterback, most of their rosters figured out, and they have enough capital to be able to shore up, I think, a lot of the spots where they are weak. Really, you just need a culture change and I think some more stability and coordination on the offensive side of the ball. So Ben Johnson there makes a ton of sense. And then Lou Anarumo.
Yeah, the Raiders, but before I let you go on Anarumo quick, the Raiders thing, it only really made sense because of the Brady factor, right? It felt like he was going to switch too.
They felt like leverage.
100%. Because, again, the quarterback situations where you had one here in Drake, you have a promising one here, in Chicago and Caleb Williams. And then even Jacksonville, who sort of was lurking in the Ben Johnson sweepstakes, they have Trevor Lawrence as well. And he could have probably taken him to the next level. The Raiders is such a mystery. They have the 12th overall pick, but there's no real clear-cut answer there. And I think that's something that Ben Johnson, as well as Mike Vrabel, wanted in their next job. So, but yeah, anyway, go ahead, Lou Anarumo. I know he was someone that was on your radar to potentially come here.
Yeah, so the Bears actually just hired a defensive coordinator recently. Let me see the name. I just had it. I believe they just hired somebody. Where is it? I just had it, and now it's gone. Well, anyway, I thought Lou Anarumo was somebody who made sense for Ben Johnson. They worked together in Miami. Also, I thought Lou Anarumo could make sense.
Oh, it's Dennis Allen. Dennis Allen is coming on with Ben Johnson.
Okay, there you go. So that makes sense. But I also thought that the fact that Terrell Williams has been tied to the Patriots because of his history with Mike Vrabel. He was his defensive line coach and assistant head coach in the last season. They were together in Tennessee. He was on the same staff as Lou Anarumo, and they were in Miami as well. I figured maybe you give, once again, Terrell Williams that assistant head coach title, so he maybe works with the front. Then Lou Anarumo more works with the secondary, and that's kind of his area of expertise. Thought it could have worked, but a really good defense coordinator now with the Colts. Going to be able to help out against C.J. Stroud for the foreseeable future. And the Patriots, still not sure where they're going to go with DC, but like Ben Johnson, that Lions staff is going to start to make their mass exodus now that they're out of the playoffs. So look for something on Terrell Williams, probably sooner than later.
I was going to say, let's stay on that for a second, because I know that Dan Campbell spoke this morning in his end-of-season press conference about how they're kind of getting themselves ready to lose out on Ben Johnson and Aaron Glenn. And I feel like Terrell Williams could potentially be somebody who maybe Detroit could go after as their DC, someone who's worked in as their offense or their defensive line coach, was the assistant head coach with Vrabel. So I wonder if he would rather stay there and get promoted. I don't know. He didn't seem like he was on a short list any of the research I saw for Detroit, but it feels like he could potentially come here to New England. I know Mike Reese mentioned him as a potential option as well. So yeah, look out for that. I think that could be a reasonable choice here, especially with Anarumo off the board. Now let's talk offense for the Patriots staff, because Mike Reese, after I want to say a couple hours after we did our coaching staff audit last Friday, Reese reported that Bob McNell, tight ends coach Bob McNell, wide receivers coaches Tyler Hughes and Tyquan Underwood, and running backs coach Taylor Embry will not be returning. And then we also just found out this morning that Scott Peters as well as Mike McCarthy will be headed to Cincinnati to take over their offensive line room. So before we get into anything, we'll kick it back to me so I can set up in a second. But Scott Peters, your guy, you loved him. You loved the track that this was going. Did the Patriots make a mistake not trying to retain Scott Peters in the room?
I don't know if I can say a mistake because I have no idea what exactly Mike Vrabel's vision is for the offensive line, if he had somebody in mind. Because I thought if he didn't have an offensive line coach really already in his Rolodex, then yeah, it made a ton of sense to go with Scott Peters because he's already been there. He's highly respected. You talk to Brian Callahan, who's Bill Callahan, I'm sorry, one of the best offensive line coaches in history. You also ask Jim McNally, another legendary offensive line coach. They have a ton of respect for what Scott Peters does. And obviously he was handed a tough position with all the injuries and lack of talent on the offensive line. I know that you could point out the fact that City So took a step back under him. You could point to the fact that it took Leighton Robinson a long time to really get the strike system under control, where it felt like he showed any comfort really in the offense on a consistent basis. But we also related it at one point to kind of like the offense under Brady, where yes, it's complicated, and that's why you'd like to have more veterans and players who can adapt more quickly in that kind of system, because yes, it's a little more difficult mentally, but it's going to pay off because you're going to have so many answers as long as you know how to use them. So I think it makes sense if you want to be more of this draft and develop team, maybe a coach who is better developing young players, has experience developing young players. And we know that Mike Vrabel is going to be involved in the offensive line as well. Also, I'm going to look really fast. I know the Titans assistant offensive line coach is someone who would actually have maybe a little bit of experience with the strike system because he worked under Bill Callahan and he remained on the staff while Vrabel was there. Let me see who the coach is really quick. I'm looking up their staff right now.
On the Patriots offensive line staff too, I wonder, the Peters and McCarthy go. Robert Kugler sounds like he's still sticking around, and he is also working at is it the East West Shrine Bowl as well? He's headed somewhere. I know that Drew Wilkins is coaching the defense, but I'm pretty sure Robert Kugler is coaching the offensive line
you're right.
For one of those teams as well. So look, that doesn't necessarily mean he's sticking around, but it sounds like he's another guy, another assistant who's well respected, just like Drew Wilkins. He doesn't leave for Cincinnati. So I wonder if that means that he has sort of a handshake agreement to potentially have a role here next year as well.
I do remember when he was hired, they said the same about Michael McCarthy, to be fair, but I do remember hearing from like a few places that Kugler is somebody who's very highly respected and rising in the coaching ranks. So yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if he does stick around.
Yep. Did you find out who you were looking for on that?
I did not know, honestly.
That's fine. Okay. That's all good. Let's keep it here then on the offensive side in the coordinator search. Interesting note this morning, Taylor, listening into Mike Reese on Felger and Maz, who actually did the morning shift for 98.5 The Sports Hub this morning. Mike Reese was talking about where the Patriots offensive coordinator search is going. And he doesn't sound as confident as some of the national talking heads that Josh McDaniels is necessarily the favorite in the clubhouse to be the Patriots' next offensive coordinator. He was mentioned how he never has actually coached with Mike Vrabel. So there's not that yes, there's a relationship. They've known each other. He's local, but it was a player-coach relationship. It wasn't a coach-coach relationship. So he was kind of pumping the brakes a little bit. So I don't know if I couldn't tell if it was necessarily informed, if it was purely speculation on Reese's front. But that's starting to tell me that maybe Josh isn't as much as said and done as it sounded like it was last week. And then on the other side of things with Thomas Brown, Marcus Brady coming in, two guys who have worked under Frank Reich. I wonder if Frank Reich's the guy. I'm sort of take stealing / morphing a take from Evan Lazar, Patriots.com, who mentioned and sort of connected the dots where Thomas Brown, Marcus Brady, unfortunately have to be the Rooney Rule candidates and then come in and work under Frank Reich, who they've worked with in the past. Those dots connected. I know Reich and Vrabel at least knew each other from the AFC South, coached against each other, Titans, Colts, for a couple of years there. Sounds like he has all the respect in the world. So I wonder if Frank Reich's going to kind of swoop in and maybe get this job ahead of Josh McDaniels. What do you make of all of it?
He at least is someone who has experience. He obviously played quarterback, Frank Reich, for the Bills for a while there, was like a great backup for them and has experience working with quarterbacks. So if they did want to go the Frank Reich route, that's definitely one that I feel more comfortable with. And I think it does make sense throwing some water on Josh McDaniels. I don't know. We haven't covered Mike Vrabel long enough, so I don't really know how comfortable he is kind of just lying to our faces or
Fair.
maybe saying things and, skirting the truth. But when he says he's got a long list, I believe him. And I do think it's smart for him to want to get as many resources as he can, knowing how valuable a commodity Drake Maye is. So if it comes to him just wanting to make sure that he's being thorough and not rushing into a decision, yeah, maybe you don't want to just pigeon yourself into Josh. Then with Frank Reich, like you said, some familiarity with his work. Maybe Frank Reich, someone who's better as an offensive coordinator type, more as an offensive guru than he is as a head coach and somebody leading a franchise. That's a really important part of this. Maybe kind of a similar story to a Josh McDaniels. And I know that Frank Reich got a lot of credit for his work with the quarterbacks, especially when he was in Philly. I think the big reason that he became a head coach was what he was able to do, obviously, with Nick Foles when they won the Super Bowl.
Work in Philly, and then and I don't remember if it was necessarily him on staff or who was there, but no, I think it was. He went through the Andrew Luck situation. Andrew Luck was supposed to be his quarterback and then retired. Then he got thrown Jacoby Brissett. He had Phillip Rivers. He had Matt Ryan, and then ends up getting fired. He still made the playoffs with both of those guys at the back end. So did pretty good work with the Colts.
Wait, he actually no. So he wasn't. So he left the year they drafted Andrew Luck. That was 2012. They drafted Andrew Luck. He was the Cardinals receivers coach in 2012. 2013, he went to the Chargers and was their quarterbacks coach, was the Chargers coordinator from 2014 to 2015. Then he jumped on with the Eagles from 2016 to 2017.
No, but yeah, but I'm saying he was in Indy when Andrew Luck retired, which was in 2018, 2019. When did he get hired in
that's
Indy?
Right. Yes, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. When did Andrew Luck? It might have been the year. Was it 2018?
I want to say 2018, 2019.
August 2019. Okay.
Yeah. So he worked with Reich his first year, Andrew Luck, and then Andrew Luck essentially abruptly retires. Yeah. And so then Frank Reich was the head coach and had to go through Jacoby Brissett, Matt Ryan, Phillip Rivers in like a 3-year span, trying to figure that out. Still took him to the playoffs. So he's done good work with quarterbacks as well.
I'm trying to think if there's somebody I'm confusing about those. Oh, it's Doug Peters. I'm in my head. I mixed him up with Doug Peters for some reason. I think it's because of the Eagles connection, and they're just like old looking white dudes. So
that's okay. No, but yeah. So that's
yeah. Okay,
we're on the same page now. So so he was the OC with Philly when they had Foles and when they had Carson Wentz and then Nick Foles wins a Super Bowl with Nick Foles, then goes to Indy, gets screwed quarterback there, gets fired, and then got a raw deal with Carolina, by the way. 11 games, timid, the opposite of a timid owner, somebody who just pulled the rug right under him out of 11 games, hasn't been in the league since. Starting to warm up to Frank Reich. It feels like the tea leaves are kind of falling in place here with him, essentially.
I will say, I'll look it up real quick. I feel like his tenure in Carolina wasn't fully because he just got a raw deal. Why did Frank Reich fail in Carolina? Let me look it up real quick because I feel like he wasn't really great either and didn't do a ton to help Bryce Young. I'm just going to grok it real quick and see what the Twitter algorithm says. 14 performance was the first one. Yeah. Come on, faster. Come on, AI. Struggles with rookie Bryce Young, offensive coordination issues. There were inconsistencies in the play calling. Reich initially handed over play calling duties to coordinator Thomas Brown, only to take them back weeks later. This back and forth indicated a lack of clear strategy or confidence in the offensive approach, which likely contributed to the team's poor performance. Then you also got philosophical mismatches. There was a reported clash in offensive philosophies among Reich's staff. The offensive line coach, James Campen, was known for a power run scheme, while Thomas Brown came from a background that emphasized pre-snap and post-snap movement, and Reich himself had a spread offense background. Ooh. This diversity in coaching philosophies might have led to a disjointed. Who put this staff together? That sounds ridiculous. That sounds like the Patriots.
Yeah, it does. All right. Well, that's interesting.
So those are concerns, at least, if he is the candidate. Like, clearly, whatever was going on with that staff and them working together, it was not working out. So I don't know if that maybe worries me about him being the guy who's going to be your offensive head coach.
That's a good point. It's fair. There's the decent connections there. I'm looking at his head coaching record. So he got fired after a 3-5-1 start with Indy in 2022, and then got hired by Carolina, started 1-10 and got canned after 11 games. So it hasn't been great, but it's not, again, it's the head coach versus OC thing, right? That we talk about with Josh. Maybe there's a better chance he comes in, head coach of the offense, has a better understanding, but we'll see. But I think the big story here today is what Reese mentioned on the Sports Hub, that it doesn't feel like McDaniels could necessarily be the favorite So we'll see what happens there. But let's get into the fun stuff here with Mike Vrabel, his rules, his culture, and all that good stuff. But before we do, a quick word from our friends at Prize Picks. We will be right back. Prize Picks is the best place to get real money sports action. With over 10 million members and billions of dollars in awarded winnings, Prize Picks has made daily fantasy sports accessible to all, and all you have to do is pick more or less on at least 2 players for a shot to win up to 1,000 times your cash. Run your game all season long on Prize Picks, and the big game in the NFL is almost here, which means it's now or never. Don't miss out on the last football game of the season with Prize Picks, the best place to win cash while watching the game. Prize Picks is also giving away a free pick for the big game, where one of the starting quarterbacks will only need to throw for 1 yard to win. And if you're correct on at least one more stat projection, you will win real cash. So sign up today on the Prize Picks app. You'll get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. It's guaranteed. So make sure you sign up today, download the app, and use code CLNS to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code CLNS to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks, run your game. Prize Picks, run that game on the Prize Picks app. $50 when you play that first $5 lineup. And I mentioned last night on our Patriots postgame show, Taylor, that unfortunately went 0-4 in the divisional round. So we're back on basketball tonight. Celtics are playing in San Francisco against the Warriors, a 5 p.m. MLK Day tip-off. We're coming up in just over 35 minutes out in San Francisco. So I have a lineup. I posted it on Twitter, but I'll give it out here as well. I'm going Steph Curry to have more than 24.5 points and Jaylen Brown to have more than 5.5 rebounds. Steph always kills the Celtics. He scored 25 plus in, I believe, 6 of his last 7. And then Jaylen Brown, although the Celtics are struggling, Jaylen Brown has been solid on the boards, so I'm taking him to have more than 5.5 rebounds. So we'll see if it hits. We'll have some fun, and if you want to join, head over to Prize Picks. Use that code CLNS. You get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. All right, let's have some fun. Mike Vrabel's rules. We have a ton of fun talking points here for the show. We're going to go through everything, or mostly everything, Mike Vrabel had to say about his rules, about his culture, and how he wants to run this team. Obviously, all empty words until they happen. And that's kind of where things went with Gerard Mayo last year. And that's why I think it's important that we take a look at these and kind of map it out and have some fun. And we'll start with the rules of Mike Vrabel. And he mentioned them right off the top pretty much in his press conference. So we have some videos. We'll use those. We'll play them back and forth and go for it. So here's what Mike Vrabel said about his rules of the team.
You know, we're not going to have a whole lot of rules. We're going to start with being on time and being respectful. And being able to communicate like anybody else would outside this building. If you were late for an appointment, if you had something going on, that we're going to have people that are around the players for them to be able to trust and say, hey, I've got this going on. And I've tried to do this in Tennessee, that if somebody walks in the door at 7:45 and they just, you know, there's something on their face that they're wearing something, they're holding on to something, that something's not right, I would rather give that player 30 minutes or 45 minutes, however much amount of time that he needs to take care of a situation, than the 7 hours that he's going to waste wearing it through the day. And I want to provide as many points of contact with the players so that they feel comfortable.
Taylor, I like it. I feel like it's, you know, we've mentioned that he sort of is the middleman between Gerard Mayo and Bill Belichick, where he, you know, the hard ass vibe that people didn't like with Bill, but also relationship builder and gives guys their credit, understands the mental side of things. So it makes a lot of sense. Just be on time, communicate, and sort of, I respect you, you respect me type of thing with these Patriots.
And that's supposed to be the groundwork of any of these championship teams. Like when you watch, especially behind the scenes, when the Patriots are winning championships, when any of these teams are winning championships, the coolest part of it is they usually feel like a genuine family. Like that, you can tell these guys really do work their butts off for each other. And you start to see it not just on the offense, not just on the defense, but you see a shared respect among everyone. Now, obviously, in a winning locker room, you're going to get that. But I think, and we're going to talk about this later, it's not just going to be when they're winning. I think it's going to be a culture where I think the Patriots, I will say, I think Bill did a good job of installing a culture where guys really did buy into needing to care about one another. And that's through things that Vrabel's talked about. Like, you need to know about the opponents. You need to know about your teammates, where you get quizzed and everyone's constantly on edge because they know that somebody could ask you a question about a teammate or, you know, an opponent you're about to face. And if you don't know, then you become kind of an outsider where all these other people are working their butts off to constantly be on point. And now, obviously, there's some players are going to skirt that. Like Vrabel said, you don't want a bunch of Mike Vrabels running around, but you do at least want some common perspective when it comes to that shared respect, wanting to fight for your brother and all those camaraderie kind of buzz terms that we hear all the time, but they really do matter when things get tough, like we've seen the past couple of years, and you have to fight through that adversity where, hey, if this is another if this is a 5-win season, a 6-win season, no one's going to be happy with that, even if it's a step in the right direction. So you still need to have that bit of unity to be able to persevere and be able to build on any of the potential lessons that you learn from losing and all those hardships.
And I like the culture aspect, which we're going to get to right now, and sort of what he says about it's not just the culture when you're winning, but you really learn about that culture when you're losing as well. So I want to play that here, and then we'll kind of dive into all the bits and pieces of what he had to say about the culture that the Patriots are going to have here.
Our football team, I want to galvanize this building. I want to galvanize our fans. And the most important thing are the players. There's some of them right here. I want to provide a program that provides their ownership, but also their accountability of each other. And one that they'll be proud to be a part of and that they're going to fight for. You know, you guys are going to ask me questions about culture, which I'll be happy to talk about and discuss. One thing I've realized about culture is that you can find out what your culture looks like when your family, your business, or your team is at its low point. It's not when you're winning Super Bowls, or it's not when you're 7-1 or 10-1. Because then everybody's waving towels and everybody's happy and they're excited to come to work. But when you get hit in the mouth or you're down or the chips are against you, you know, then you can take a snapshot of what your company or your team looks like, and then you'll find out what kind of culture you have. But that culture is going to be built on winning, a competitive spirit throughout our roster, throughout our players, and throughout our coaches and our staff, and the ability to put the team first and care about somebody other than yourself. And I'm excited to do that. I'm excited to get to work.
I love it. Culture, it's built on winning. It's built on a competitive spirit throughout your roster, coaches, and staff, and the ability to put the team first and care about somebody other than yourself.
And I mean, winning should be first on this list, right? It's pretty easy to just assume, but no, because if you're not winning, that culture is not going to be existent and you're going to be out of there in a few years. And that's one thing that I think Gerard and Mike both made a point to establish the fact that, like, there shouldn't be a timeline on this, that it is going to take time before they get to where they want to be at, but it is important. And I think, again, Mayo did this at times, but saying, like, it is hard to build a culture when you're not winning. And that's where a lot of these other things are going to come through, where you do want that competitive spirit on the roster. And that comes with who you bring in your building, right? If you want to bring in someone who's going to be like what Mike Vrabel described, where you come in, you want a free meal, you don't want to get coach talk, you just want to leave, that's going to spread throughout the locker room. That's going to become contagious. If you draft like young players and sign free agents who are constantly competing, whether it's, we always hear the old stories about like how guys would compete to drink water, like to do all these things throughout the day and throughout practice that just created that constant desire to like be better because the guy next to you was working his butt off and he was trying to hold you to that same standard. But also at some point, if you're the kind of player that fits this culture, you don't need to be pushed because you already have that in you. And then it's just you're feeding off each other. And then the ability to care about not just yourself. At the end of the season, we were hearing that some players were, maybe speaking out of school where they weren't really living up to everything that they were saying. And you started to feel like some players thought that guys weren't as bought in maybe, and they weren't really trying their hardest. And again, this is a rebuild. Even if they're, Commanders type rebuild where they are in the playoffs next year and everything's great, when things do get hard, once again, you still want to have enough people in your building and enough guardrails in place to ensure that it is still one where you are fighting hard, not just for yourself and for your family and for your paycheck. Obviously, those things are at the top of the list, but it also does have to be an element of you caring about the other guys around you.
I like that. The quote here where we don't have it in the clip, but he says, we want to treat every player the same way they treat the team, and we want to treat every employee the same way they treat the team. So it's not just it's what you're giving back and what the team gives back to you. And again, I don't want to say they're empty words because they're not, but with winning being at the top of this list, like, that can be your rah-rah, this is what we're going to do and this is why we're going to do it. When that turns into winning, that's where it really sort of, sets itself up for success. And the fact that he's done this in the past as well, with Tennessee, obviously makes it a little bit easier for him to sort of convey and be like, look, this is what you're going to do. This is what you're going to do for us. And then we're going to give this, we're going to give this to you and then you're going to give it back. It's a hand-in-hand thing. Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly. And so, and then also the entitlement with the football team. I thought this was the big one. I want to
shot heard around the world.
I want to play that again real quick as well. Then we don't have as many clips until the very end, but this was an important one that, like you said, made a lot of waves, but also made a lot of sense compared to where this team was last year.
We're going to earn the right to be here every day. We're going to remove entitlement from our football team. We're going to get everything that we've earned. From the head coach to the position coaches, all the way down to the players. Right? We're going to earn the right to be here every single day. I always say that I don't want to get into too many messages that'll be geared for the players. But I hold those conversations. Those are special conversations between the coaches and the players. But we want to treat every player the same way they treat the team, and we want to treat every employee the same way that they treat the team. And if they care about the team and they come here with a great attitude and a willingness to work and help the team, I've asked Robert to do everything that we can for them, to support them and their families. That's the type of environment that I want to build. And I'm excited about it.
So I'll let you go on the entitlement thing in a second, but I didn't realize we had the audio there. I said we didn't about we're going to give you what you give to the team, where I feel like sometimes, and maybe I'm wrong, and maybe I'm putting words in these guys' mouths, but Tom Brady, for example, right, gave everything to the Patriots. He gave it his all. He did X, Y, Z. He worked his tail off. And then towards the end, he felt like he wasn't getting anything back, right? It was, he still, Bill still won't pay me. I still feel like I'm, low on the totem pole here. I want to be paid. I want something back, and he wasn't getting it. What Vrabel is saying is, you come in here, you work your ass off every single day, and we're going to take care of you. We're going to take care of you from an ownership level. You're going to have the best, facility. You're going to have the best mental health. You're going to feel like you're getting something back as long as you come in here and work hard every single day.
And that's something that we heard from the other regime as well, that they wanted to make sure that players felt like they were appreciated, whether that was the fact that for years on years, you had players who were productive that you drafted and brought in that you didn't end up re-signing for one reason or another. And it got to the point where, you look up and Deron Harmon is the only early round pick that had ever actually gotten a second contract in the past decade. So that's part of it. I think they're building the new stadium. I think that Mike Vrabel, he seemed very aware of what was wrong with the organization and what outsiders thought about it. Obviously, they've been getting horrendous grades when it comes to the facilities and all the resources, even not having a daycare area for players' children and their spouses, which I think they put in this year. So, yeah, it makes a lot of sense for Vrabel to hit on, because that is something that cannot be left with the old regime. You need to have this be a destination again, and that's something else they hit on. And one of the ways you do that is by having facilities that people get excited about when they come on their free agent tours, not something they look at and think, oh my God, this is the worst workout room, locker room, what have you, that I've seen in any of my free agent visits.
Totally. All right, let's get into player expectations and and we also have non-negotiables, which we're all looped in here. But essentially, Mike Vrabel says we're going to demand effort and finish. People ask what the non-negotiables are. Our effort and our finish is going to be the contract that we make to our teammates. That will be my job to make sure. It's the greatest compliment you ever receive as a coach, that your players work hard. I'm paraphrasing there. The leaders are going to be the ones defining the culture, and the culture will be what drives and gives you that result that we're after. So the type of player, when you get into scouting and evaluation, every team has height, weight, speed. That's a different thing. But regardless, sorry, player expectations, grand scheme of things. What do you make of what he had to say? Are they attainable? And just your thoughts on this aspect of Vrabel's rules.
I mean, they're absolutely attainable, because like you said, our effort and our finish that's the contract. And he said, It's my job to make sure that we get that. We didn't get that all the time last year. And we always pointed to, it's hard to know if Gerard is doing enough behind the scenes to get this out of players. Like, are you making sure you're holding them accountable? When they do something wrong, are they running laps? Are you benching guys when you have to? And we started to see that benching thing didn't really pop up, but you also at times did have like players get cut, players in significantly reduced roles. It's not like guys are running around doing what they wanted, but at the end of the day, when you watch the Patriots, you didn't see them as a defense or an offense, really either side of the ball, where consistently you're like, these guys really play hard, or, they're playing with their hair on fire. You didn't see that. We'll get into more why a little bit later. Actually, no, we'll do it right now, because part of that is knowing what to do, the preparation process, and whether that's the fact that Vrabel can actually go to different positions and kind of coach them up, which I think was so valuable for Bill, where you understand, and I think there's a certain level of respect you gain when your defensive coach can also work with offensive linemen, work with tight ends, maybe give receivers a tip or two. Like, those things are really helpful, and I think that dynamic coaching ability is also going to help the coaches, because they're going to understand what the standard is. Because when Mike Vrabel's going to their circuit and saying something, it's not just for the players, it's for the coaches as well. And then to put the team first, we kind of already talked about that. But then looping back into what we mentioned, playing fast and aggressive. So many times the defense, maybe less so on the back end because they had more veterans, but even times on the back end, it just felt like players didn't know what they were doing a lot of the time. And one of Vrabel's quotes in his opening presser was, you can't tell when a player is scared to do something or when he doesn't know what to do, because he'll do the same thing. He just kind of stands there and is slow to react. Now, if players know exactly what's coming and they say, okay, I have a combined Rolodex of what could potentially happen in the situation, now I can just react instead of thinking.
Totally.
I think that's what Mike Vrabel is going to bring, especially when you talk about the defensive side of the ball.
100%. I think that's the main one here, right? Is knowing what to do. And obviously knowing what to do turns into playing fast, having effort, and finishing through, right? Where it felt like too many times offensively and defensively, there were far too many mental gaffes with Gerard Mayo's team last year. Offensively, you saw it from the receiver room. You also saw it from the offensive line with, blatant false starts and things of that nature, which sometimes it's impossible to take them all out of the game, but you can definitely, pull back a little bit. And then defensively, it felt like too many times, at least in the defensive backfield from the safety position with guys like Kyle Duggar, thinking too much, being slow to react. And I hate to put it on Duggar because he was also playing injured, so I want to give him that. But you're right. It definitely comes from the mental side of things. And just being able to, you mentioned the Rolodex, right? And knowing if this happens, this is where I go. If this happens, this is where I go, right? And I feel like, again, I keep going back to Tom Brady and the old ways of the Patriots, right? But that's really where, if you just, and it goes in the preparation, where Brady tells this story where he was asked by, I think, Colin Cowherd a couple of weeks ago on the Herd, like, did it become too much? Was Bill too much of a stickler to have all these these rules and have to be on, not even be on time, but just all the meetings and the constant prep? And Brady was like, no, it actually made our job a million times easier, because we would go in on Saturday night, the day before the game, and go over every single thing that could happen. And if we didn't know what was going to happen, instead of being like, well, that only happens 5% of the time, we're going to know the answer to it. Because then that just, that takes in all 100%. Where we talk about the Patricia team, right? And when he was on the offensive side of the ball, coaching the offense, and there was this story, I forget where it came from, where a player essentially asked, well, what do we do here? And Patricia was like, well, I don't know the answer. I'll have to get back to you. It's like, that's what you can't have from your coaching staff. So
the players were the ones who had the answers to the test, because they'd actually been in the offense, because Kendrick Bourne had been in the offense. And Patricia was like, how the hell am I supposed to know? I never done it.
Yeah, exactly. So it feels like these are so obvious, but it's good to have a guy in Vrabel who has actually done these in practice before, both as a player and as a coach as well.
And I think it was Ben Jones who mentioned, like, yeah, you'd be mentally exhausted by the time the game was over, but it was because you put so much work in. And I know people are so critical of the Patriot way and all that. I think it is the biggest misconception, because I don't think the Patriot way were the things that got Bill fired. I don't think the Patriot way was ignoring offense. I don't think it was being disrespectful to your players and your fellow coaches. Like, that's not being a jerk. Like, just all those things are not the Patriot way. The Patriot way is working your butt off because you care more about winning than you care about your own personal comfort and well-being.
Right.
That is the Patriot way, and all the toughness and the mental resilience and all the things that fall into those buckets. every team wants the Patriot way, right? Maybe
Right.
not quite as stern. And I think that's where Mike Vrabel can walk that tightrope of, yeah, we're going to work our butts off, but maybe not to the degree of Gerard Mayo, where meetings are shorter, but people don't feel that they've learned as much in the meetings, right? They're not concise. They're just less efficient. And
Right.
Vrabel's going to know, yeah, no, you're going to learn a lot, and you are going to study, and you are going to know your opponent better than some of them know themselves. But you know what that's going to contribute to? Winning. Because you're not going to lose a whole lot of games because you don't know something. And that's a coach's job. The coach's job is to put you in position and make sure that you are as prepared as possible. So, again, Ben Jones didn't seem to have a problem with it. They won games doing it in Tennessee. Obviously not for long because you need talent as well.
Right.
But that this all falls in that same bubble of the Patriot way is not something they need to get away from. They needed to modernize the approach. Sounds like that's what Vrabel's doing.
Well, that's the part that's the one part of this I kind of worry about is you learn that way. And they, the coaches in McDaniels and Brian Flores and Matt Patricia and Charlie Weiss, they all learned this hard. The camera's zooming in on you because it can't find your eyes. That's what you get for having a very expensive camera setup in Taylor's house. You get zoomed in on nothing. But those coaches, right? They learned that Patriot way and that this is the way we do things. But it's harder to do in practice when you're not winning and you're just doing it because this is how I learned it. Where everyone bought into Bill because you saw that you won games in Super Bowls. And hey, if you want to do this, you're going to win. And here's the evidence. Now, Mike Vrabel sort of has, he was able to garner that buy-in in Tennessee, I think, because he walked the line of it's hard, but it's worth it. And here's why, and we're going to give back. So it all kind of ties together here. And you just hope that he continues to get that buy-in here and guys don't tune him out because, well, who are you to talk to us? And who are you to say this to us? And
because he builds relationships, he's emphasized that he has not been shy about wanting to be that guy, and Mayo did too. And that's why he had the buy-in he had. It's why players weren't going out and insulting him and why they were going out of their way to defend him was because I think he really did care about them. And I think they felt that. And that, again, Vrabel and Mayo have both said, if a guy knows that you care about him, you can coach him as hard as you want because he will always know that you are only trying to help him. He may not like to hear it, but as a professional, sometimes you got to swallow your pride. That's what being coachable is. So I think that's another reason that this is not Belichick's Patriot way. This is Vrabel's, where it's going to be very difficult. But when we win or even when we lose, I'm on your side and I'm only trying to help you be the best for yourself and for your family. You know, all your people.
For sure. All right, we'll finish up with coach expectations, their annual goals as Mike Vrabel's Patriots, as well as Drake Maye and the passing game. But first, a quick word from our friends at Game Time. We will be right back. This episode is also powered by Game Time, the best place to get tickets to anything, concerts, games, and more. They have the Game Time Picks feature that makes getting tickets even easier. It filters out the fluff and only shows you incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets to find the best value. They also have the lowest price guarantee, and they have seat views to check out exactly what it's going to look like from your seat. So make sure you download the Game Time app today to take the guesswork out of buying tickets. Download the app, create an account, and use code CLNS for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code CLNS for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Like we said in the read, head over to Game Time for the best ticket prices all around. Bruins, Celtics, Boston College, we mentioned earlier, cheap tickets over there at Conti Forum. Get in as little as $1, and that is the all-in price thanks to the all-in pricing feature. All you got to do is head into the app settings, toggle that on, and then it's everything you see on the seat views and on the sort of map there. You don't get hit with those hidden fees at the end because that's all the all-in price, taxes and fees included. So gives you a better idea of what you're going to be paying there. So head over to Game Time, use that code CLNS, you get $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. All right, let's continue on here. Vrabel's rules, annual goals. He mentioned these 3 goals: winning the AFC East, hosting home playoff games, and competing for championships. And I think the big thing he does here, and he did it with pretty much every question he was asked, but there's a timeline. He said there is no timeline, right? Mm-hmm. The goal isn't necessarily compete for championships this year, but that's something we have to build toward, and that's something we have to start here early on. And I like that it kind of goes, in order: win AFC East, host playoff games, compete for championships. And it's kind of the obvious goals, the bread and butter. And I feel like even Gerard Mayo probably said these things. It almost felt like there were a lot more goals than, just the winning football games with Gerard Mayo. But your thoughts on Vrabel's goals and kind of how he outlined them last Monday?
Well, I think the biggest thing is he also explained what was going to go into the process of achieving those goals. Like, this is what Bill would talk about, where first, they always talked about it like they're not talking about the playoffs. They're talking about winning the division. That is the goal in the regular season. After that, yes, if you do that, you will host the playoff games, and the goal every single year is to compete for championships. But how does one do that? One thing Vrabel mentioned, we're going to work like crazy. We're going to compete like crazy. We're going to give players a plan, and they're going to form an identity on the field in the way they're going to play and play for each other that they're going to be proud of. Now, for the Patriots last season, they wanted their identity to be a physical football team that could run the ball when you knew they were going to run the ball, that could stop the run whenever, just stop the run, period, and to be a physical team on the kicking teams. Now, the special teams are pretty solid. They obviously didn't have the talent or the coaches, I think, around them, a combination in, a lot of cases, or one or the other in others, to really do this with any consistency. Now, Mike Vrabel, he knows what he wants in a team. When it comes to hiring staff, yes, that's where a lot of the question marks are going to be. And that's where I think a lot of our optimism or pessimism for this season is in the foreseeable future. It's probably going to land, but at least he plans on the hard work. Like, this is not just going to be something that falls into place. It's going to take a lot that goes into it, but the fact they want to form an identity and have articulated it, again, you got to do it. But that's the first step on it, because you do want to be able to, like, with those Patriots teams, when you think about first dynasty or the second dynasty, those were physical, tough-ass football teams, right? Those are scary dudes. Like, you think of the defenses, like, even with the second dynasty, obviously you had Vrabel, McGinnis, Rodney Harrison, but then you had Hightower, you had Jamie Collins, you had guys like Devin McCourty and Patrick Chung. Like, they were still a lot of bad dudes on those squads. So one, I like the identity piece and really knowing that, no, we're going to give them the steps to reach these goals that we have. But also, most importantly, and what we saw in the playoffs, or what we've been seeing in the playoffs, we want to take advantage of bad football.
Love that quote. That was my second favorite quote behind the entitlement quote from Vrabel on Monday.
That's really the big one. Like, you see it every week where you're just watching these teams and you're like, if you just didn't do that dumb thing. And what did Belichick say about Brady? The thing that impressed him the most about Tom Brady was how he was able to mitigate mistakes. That was the biggest thing, because there's so many times where you don't live to fight another down. You turn the ball over on first or second down when, who knows, you could have thrown a touchdown on the very next play. Or how many times do we see a defense doesn't take advantage of an offensive mistake and then the offense kills them on the very next opportunity? Like, all of these different types of things that we see, it always feels like self-inflicted errors. There aren't a whole lot of games that truly feel like one team absolutely just won, right? We get that with Bills, Chiefs. Every year it feels like, yeah, it's just going to kind of come down to either whoever does the most dominant thing. But also, at some point in there, you look and you're like, oh, somebody made a mistake that completely cost them the game. So being complementary, that's another way of just saying this. You want to play complementary football, where when you get the Christian Gonzalez interception, go down the field and have Ramondre Stevenson go on a long run to score a touchdown. Like, make sure that when one team screws up, you are able to turn that into points or what have you. So I like the fact that he knows what he wants to do. And yes, the goals are obvious, but they're very, very simple, fundamental things you have to do to even give yourself a chance. And at the top of that list, like Belichick said, before you win, you got to stop from losing. Mayo called the complementary football. The way that Vrabel articulates it, take advantage of bad football, capitalize on other teams' mistakes.
Yeah, right. It's when that, and that's where Vrabel's smarts as a coach excite me as far as the bad football, right? Because we're going to make you mess up. We're not going to mess up. And when you mess up, we're going to jump on you for it. And we're going to make sure we know what's going on in this game at every single second and every single step. And we're going to do it better than you. And I think that those goals and the taking advantage of the bad football and knowing and being super smart and hyper aware of everything that's going on, that goes into sort of the next two things we're going to talk about, which is how they're going to coach these guys. And also his role in Drake Maye's development, the game management side, and things of that. So I want to get into those coach expectations now. And this is another one where it's clear, concise, and he has an agenda of how he wants to do things. And he mentions that he wants coaches to teach, he wants coaches to develop, and he wants them to inspire their players by making a connection. Again, back to we're going to be hard on you, but we're going to do it with a relationship, with a connection. and we're going to be all in this together. This isn't a coach-player relationship. It's a coach-player relationship on the same level.
Yeah, I feel like we've touched on the coaching thing, so I don't want to like yap your guys' ears off about the same thing.
Right.
But really, at the end of the day, if you're a coach, you are just a teacher, right? You want to make sure you're getting the best out of these guys, and you want to make sure you're developing them not just as players, but also as men. So really, the last part, wanting to inspire by making that connection, that kind of trickles from the other things. If you are there for the right reasons and you want to make sure that you are developing players, yeah, it's probably because you put the work in to make sure that you understand them. Like, I know what Vrabel says, it makes them tick, where like some guy may need to get yelled at. Some guy, you want to coach him hard, but you don't want to go too far because he'll just get into his head and he'll spiral.
And then he buys out,
to get the best out of your guys.
Yep, for sure. I love it. And I think that there's a couple other important things here with just the types of players that they're now dealing with, where he didn't make it too much of a big deal. He was sort of asked about these, and he mentioned just like the NIL era and working with players who can kind of jump ship and do what they want. And this kind of goes back to the entitlement thing, where players with entitlement, you need to learn, we're not going to do that here, and that's not how we're going to do things. Again, he didn't make it a huge deal, but I think he's also done a good job at being able to adapt to the younger. He was asked by Courtney Cox on the Greg Hill show, the millennial football player, and he kind of skirted the question, but he answered it in a way where it's like, okay, he gets what he's dealing with. And, again, the Ben Jones connection, I keep going back to that. Giardi wrote a great thing on it a couple weeks ago where he knew what he was going with. He comes off the field and he's crying in his arms. Like, I knew you had that in you. I knew you could do this. Where I don't want to say you wouldn't have seen that with Bill, because that's not right. And that's just me kind of throwing him under the bus with things. But there's just this outward connection that he makes with these guys where they want to learn, they want to play for him, and he puts them in the right position. So I like that. And then he also talks about this shared organizational vision, how we're not always going to be on the same page. And he doesn't want to create an environment where it's my page or the highway and it's everything I do. And no, look, we can disagree and find the right way to do things and almost build that shared vision together, and that there's, kind of different ways to do it. So I thought that was important to kind of note as well.
100%, because you don't want to just have everybody on the same page, because if you do, then you're probably not going to be able to challenge each other. The way that you see the game is not going to be able to get to a point where you are maturing as a talent evaluator, whatever, because none of these guys have it all figured out necessarily. And then just to kind of wrap up on the NIL thing, one thing he said pretty specifically during his speech, and I think this is a great way to put it, because you can't just demonize NIL. You can't, because it's getting a lot of these kids paid, getting them out of poor situations, also just giving them the compensation that players have been deserving for years.
And it's not going away. That's the other thing too. You can't
That's
demonize it. You have to embrace it instead.
And he said, look, when they get to our league, there's some behavior that may have to change, and we have to be willing to help them change it. So it's not just going to be talking down to this guy and being like, oh, you're so spoiled, you have no idea what it was like in my day. Make that connection so that he understands, look, dude, I may clown you for like being a 23-year-old who's pulling up to work in like a gold Cybertruck or something like that. I'll rib you a little bit every once in a while, but understand that like there needs to be a level of humility that's going to be associated with being on this team, not having entitlement, all those things. A lot of these young kids do come in pretty entitled, not realizing what it takes to be a champion. They just realize what it takes to be a renowned college football player. Now the standard is very different.
For sure. Do you want to touch on the analytics topic now, or do you want to loop that into Drake?
Oh, we can do that. We can do that now as well.
All right. So interesting. I don't have the clip, but he was asked about, on the Greg Hill show last week about how they want to attack analytics. And basically he mentioned how they're going to do it in 3 phases where I need to find it. I need to find the quote.
I think it was like film, analytics. Oh, I thought it was in our thing.
It's fine.
Oh, it's our job to take analytical data, watch the tape, and just figure out where players fit best.
Yes, and he also went on a little bit more of the three phases. I found it now where I look at it in 3 phases. One is player acquisition. You'll get the numbers, the data, the play speed, and that's how we're going to try and go get those guys. Then health and safety. How do we manage our players? What's their workload, their speed, how often they get to 90%, and they sort of use the tracking devices to figure out how they manage their workload during the week.
That started last year. They already started doing a lot.
Yes, 100%. And then the final one he mentioned, which we'll get to with Drake Maye, is the game management risk ratio, and kind of how they use down and distance and things of that nature to pull that all into one. New news item that came out as we were on the show. Chris Cotillo from Mass Live is reporting that the Patriots are bringing in a man by the name of Joe McDonald. He was a longtime Red Sox executive, and he was most recently their director of baseball analytics, and he left the Red Sox in December and has been working for the Patriots as a senior analyst. So an interesting note there. And Evan Lazar quote tweeted it, our friend from Patriots.com, mentioning the fact that the Browns did this with Paul DePodesta, who was a longtime executive, I believe, in the Oakland A's organization, the Moneyball era with the analytics. Yeah, the analytics sort of kick in baseball. The Browns have brought him in, and Vrabel just worked with the Browns last season. So they are really embracing that analytical side of things, which I think for many is exciting to see.
Yeah, and we've been talking about they need to be more expansive. They need to update their scouting department, their personnel department, and all these things. So definitely seems like a step in the right direction. Now, I am much more of a film guy. All of this other stuff, I feel like I'm just learning on the fly.
Sure.
But Evan is much more used to these things. He is more familiar with other sports than I am. So I'm going to take his word for it. If Evan's excited about this, it seems like that's a pretty good step forward for the personnel department.
I think so too. And I also just a lot of the Browns connections, I haven't seen it yet, but it's creeped in my head a little bit where it's like, well, they were 3-13 last year and they were close to the number one pick. Like everyone's connecting all the great things Vrabel did with the Browns, but Cleveland's not that good of a football team. But
they were just talent-wise, they got shot.
Yeah. They've rebuilt that thing ever since they like drafted Baker Mayfield first overall. They've been on a much better trajectory since those 0-16 teams. And they ruined it from the top down with, the Deshaun Watson acquisition, frankly. Everything else around quarterback is solid. I see it in the chat. The Browns, the front office is amazing. Like they've done good work in there. It just hasn't necessarily paid out on the field, but we should eventually see that soon. All right, let's wrap up this show with Drake Maye and how the Patriots are going to continue the development of him. He was asked about it, and here's what he had to say last Monday.
Yeah, put great people around him. We have to... I would say that my involvement will be as it relates to game management and situational awareness and where we are on the football field and trying to develop him as a leader of the offense. And when that quarterback, when they call the play, like you want to say like everybody's going to believe that it's going to score a touchdown, like with that type of emphasis on how everything is going to operate. And, Drake is going to be his own person, but I'm going to give him some things that I feel like are necessary to help us win football games. We have to be a very efficient passing football team, right? And when you look at statistically of what wins in the National Football League, our ability to affect the other team's quarterback and our ability to provide for an efficient quarterback and passing game is a high contributor to success. And there's a lot of ways to do that, by protecting the middle of the pocket and, all those things that we're going to talk about as we move forward. But how we protect the football, how we're aggressive but not reckless, understanding where we are in the game and the situational awareness that I feel like I've developed over 6 years and in my past year in Cleveland.
He mentions Cleveland there at the end, and I also love the aggressive but not reckless part of that. But I'll leave it up to you. What do you make of the Drake Maye aspect and the being efficient passing?
It sounds, so I know people got upset with him about the stats where he's like, oh, you want passer rating and you want to run a certain amount of times. Look, I think it more matters like the order of operations that he's doing these things or how he perceives these things. Where, no, you do not want to throw the ball 45 times.
Right.
That's bad math. Like, you don't want to do that. Passer rating, is it the end-all, be-all for quarterback efficiency? No. But it exists for a reason. Because if your quarterback is like 95 or higher, you probably had a pretty good game. If it's lower, it may not be your fault, but something went wrong because you had a statistically inefficient game. Like, numbers do matter. Players get contracts. People get fired. Like, numbers do matter as much as for years I tried to ignore them. You cannot. I'm sorry, you can run. Sometimes you just got to get hired by a company that does them forever or does it for a living and, humble yourself. Thank you, Next Gen Stats. But the aggression, not recklessness part, I think that's Drake Maye's profile. We talked about that before. Did have a turnover issue, but a lot of that was just learning mistakes and growing pains and things like that. But a lot of what Mike Vrabel said is what made Bill Belichick and Tom Brady such a formidable duo, where Tom Brady obviously put the work in, had a ton of natural talent, even though obviously he wasn't the freakiest guy. He was always had a pretty good arm. Like, he was always pretty accurate, got better because of that work ethic. But what made him a superstar was the fact that he also had Bill Belichick, one of the greatest defensive minds in football, someone who had seen winning football, who had already won championships, devised some pretty great defensive game plans of his own, and was able to mind meld with Tom Brady. And they were able to say, hey, I see it this way. Oh, you see it this way? Oh, that's interesting. And continuously learn from each other. So now Drake May's 22 years old. He's going to be 23 next year. Whatever Vrabel's able to teach him is going to be massive for him early on. And then the longer that Drake is in the league, makes his own mistakes, learns his lessons, he'll be able to tell Vrabel what he's seeing from a quarterback's perspective. And obviously, no one wants to actually compare Mike Vrabel and Drake Maye to Tom Brady and Bill Belichick. No one can ever be held to that standard. But we do see with a lot of these dynamic head coach quarterback combinations that whether they are or are not on the same side of the ball, they are able to make each other better with Andy Reid. Right? Being able to tell Patrick Mahomes, hey, first 2.5 seconds, the play is mine. But also Patrick Mahomes, because he respects Andy Reid and knows the guy knows what he's talking about, can also not only listen and do what he's being told, but take that to a whole nother level because of his physical talent. So I think it's exciting. I like his ideas for what exactly this means. Some of it, again, is overlap from what we've heard from other regimes. Matt Groh was talking about protecting the middle of the pocket like 2 or 3 years ago, right? That's not new. They've wanted to build around Drake Maye since before they drafted Drake Maye. Yes, I'm glad that you're still prioritizing making sure your rookie quarterback and potential face of the franchise is not being killed because he has no line and is not throwing to guys who aren't reliable. But really the more exciting part for me when you talked about Drake Maye was how they can make each other better. First, obviously, probably going to be Mike Vrabel making Drake better, but how that relationship could grow down the line.
For sure. He also mentions personnel. The scheme and style and tempo and the cadence and all things like that. If our players can handle it, then we'll shift, we'll motion, we'll go with different cadences, we'll go on the ball, we'll try and do all these things that cause conflict. And that sort of gets into, depending on what style of football they're going to play and what offensive coordinator they're going to bring. But it sounds like he kind of wants to use the I don't want to say old age offense with Brady and Bill, but like the be efficient, don't be reckless, things like that. But then also kind of forming that into the new RPO West Coast era of offense and kind of use pretty much everything, which is why I get excited about McDaniels, because I feel like he kind of does build on and do on everything. We'll see where that plays out. But yeah, it sounds like there is the objective to kind of build together and work together with him and Drake Maye. And I think that's the most exciting part of all of this. And that's kind of where we'll wrap it up here is new head coach, Mike Vrabel, with all of these rules, with all of these tangible, this is how we're going to do things, and here's why, and here's what it's going to bring us to. Trust me, I've done this before type of thing, which, again, got some other guys in trouble in the past with Patricia and McDaniels of the world. But the difference is they hadn't done it. Mike Vrabel has done it as a head coach. And then Drake Maye, you see Jaden Daniels and Dan Quinn right now. Like they're going like this. And, hopefully that can be the same with Vrabel and Drake Maye. But it sounds like that's going to be an exciting pairing going forward.
And one other thing, I love that Vrabel actually went into detail about how to make the offense go outside of just the personnel. Because, like, no offense to Gerard Mayo, I never really expected him to know a ton about what was going on offense because Alex Van Pelt was the offensive head coach. But when you ask him offensive questions, he answered them like a linebacker. Almost always. There wasn't a ton of insight to glean other than, okay, you have a set of principles. It's old school. That's fine. I don't have a problem with old school principles as long as you are willing to adapt if you have the personnel and, there's things going on around the league that are giving clear advantages. But Vrabel was very specific. Like you kind of already mentioned it, but talking about the tempo and cadence, those were things we actually heard from Alex Van Pelt last year when he mentioned how he could help supplant things, especially later in the year when he was like, yeah, it's not just the offensive line. There's other things we can do. And I've talked about it. I love when Drake Maye was able to go up tempo because it kept the defense on their heels and was someone that dynamic who can kill you deep the second you make a mistake. When you're going fast and everyone's trying to communicate and figure out just what's going on, that can be deadly in a great way to take pressure, like we said in the games last night, off of the defensive or off of the offensive line because you're going fast and the defensive line is tired. Also, how he mentioned, like, yeah, we'll do RPOs, but things like that, wasn't specifically just RPOs, but the motion, the shifting. Everyone wants all of that stuff, but it takes time to install. Like the Rams, you don't just say, oh, I'm going to be the Rams. You need someone more often than not because it takes a lot of communication and sync for you to make that one shift, for you to make the second shift, for there to be a motion after that. That's a lot of stuff to process, especially for a young quarterback. So if Drake Maye can take a ton on his plate, maybe you do see the Patriots start to rise in motion, in the RPOs and all those things. But I love that Vrabel is saying, we'll throw everything we can at the offense. Like, that's not a problem. but we're going to make sure we do it at everyone's pace. I think Alex Van Pelt had a very similar ideology, which is another reason I think it makes sense that we're not hearing anything about him, because maybe he is retained, even if it's in a smaller role. But philosophically, a lot of what we've heard from Vrabel has been what we heard from Alex Van Pelt. It's just nice to know that you're hearing it from the defensive, really the CEO head coach, because he's not just going to be, oh, I played on defense and I was a special teamer. No, he's going to have to say,
I know everything. I'm a football
be in
coach.
depth. Exactly.
That's
awesome.
where we'll wrap it. That's kind of where we'll wrap it. In the two quick thoughts on that is, right, he's a football coach. He's not just a defensive guy who is a culture builder like Gerard Mayo. Vrabel's done it on both sides of the football. He really dove into the offense last year with Cleveland. And again, he can give you actual answers about offensive questions. And then on the motion thing, quickly before we get out of here, you mentioned, and AVP mentioned a lot, like motioning with a purpose. And we're doing this, but we're doing it for a reason. And maybe it's window dressing, but it's window dressing because this can mess you up this way. And you need to be super smart, because when you move a guy over, like the idea of the Shanahan / McVay offense is, we're all running the same plays. We're just doing it out of a bunch of different formations and making it look different to the defense. But when one guy moves over, that moves everybody's spot, right? So if you're running a concept out of trips versus like doubles, for example, guys have to be in the same spots but running from different places. So you have to be
on
smart.
The ball. Sometimes you have to get one guy's on the, like that's what happened with Henry Ford. Right.
Exactly.
In the game, we got yelled at immediately. It was because he wasn't on the ball. Hunter was like, what are you doing? There's a lot of stuff that goes into it where if you mess up, you can get flagged. You could be late. Like, sorry, not to cut in, but like that was literal example we saw from a veteran on the team at the end of the year.
Exactly. So there's got to be the buy-in across the board, being a smart football team, knowing what's going on. And it sounds like that's what Vrabel wants to bring here, going through all of these rules that he outlined last Monday. So a fun show today, kind of looking through all of those things, kind of breaking it down, not using Vrabel's words against him, but basically going through what he said and putting them into examples in practice. So that's going to do it for our Monday show here on Patriots Day. We'll be back again tomorrow. Special guest, Daniel Oyefusi from ESPN Cleveland. He's going to bring us through everything that Vrabel went through last year with the Browns. So an exciting day tomorrow. We'll be on here at 2 p.m. live with Daniel to talk about what Vrabel did last season in Cleveland. So if you want to check it out, rate, review, subscribe to the channel, subscribe to Patriots Press Pass, and we'll be here pretty much every single day throughout the week as this offseason continues. So again, thanks for watching. Take care of yourselves. Take care of each other, and we will see you all next time. Peace out, everybody.